For most of modern markets, the story was simple. Open access created competition. Competition created trust, and trust created growth. But that era is ending. The gatekeepers are changing. Power is no longer about who builds the best product. It's about who controls access, who decides who gets seen, and who gets locked out. And once access becomes scarce, the rules of the market stop being fair. They stop being open, and they start being designed. My name is Steve Colino, and we have a very important confidential remarks. Here's the uncomfortable truth. When large players reach scale, they don't just compete harder, they change the game. They use size to tilt the field, data to predict outcomes, and capital to absorb losses long enough to break smaller competitors. This isn't innovation, it's leverage. And leverage, when unchecked, doesn't create better markets. It creates dependency. The moment a few players can decide what gets visibility, what gets distribution, and what gets buried, the market stops being a marketplace at all. Let's be clear, the collapse of small players isn't collateral damage, it's the strategy. Control the channels, control the rules, starve everyone else of oxygen. Small operators don't lose because they're worse. They lose because they're denied access to the same playing field. And when survival depends on permission from a dominant platform, independence disappears, choice disappears, and competition becomes theater. Big money doesn't fear competition. It fears open access because open systems expose price, quality, and behavior. They make power visible. They make favoritism expensive, and they prevent quiet consolidation. Open access is messy, inefficient, and hard to control, and that's exactly why it works. It protects the many from the few. It keeps markets honest. And it's why the fight isn't about technology. It's about who gets to participate at all. This is the fight of the future. Not left versus right, not old versus new, but open versus controlled. Do we defend markets where opportunity is shared, or do we accept systems where access is rationed by those with the deepest pockets? Because once control replaces openness, it never gives itself back willingly. The question isn't whether consolidation will try to win. The question is whether the rest of us decide that open access is worth defending before it's gone. This part isn't shocking. Big money always looks for an edge, and when innovation stops being enough, the next move is control. Control of distribution, control of data, control of access. Because if you can't outbuild everyone, you can outposition them. You can change the rules quietly, and you can do it in ways that look strategic instead of predatory. Control today doesn't look like old school monopoly. It looks cleaner, smarter, more defensible. It hides behind efficiency, partnerships, and better experiences. But the outcome is the same. Fewer paths in, fewer ways to compete, and fewer chances for smaller players to survive without aligning themselves to the dominant system. When power concentrates, open access is always the first thing to go. Not all at once, not publicly, but incrementally. A rule here, a requirement there, an advantage that only scale can unlock. Eventually, access still exists in theory, but not in practice. And that's when the market quietly stops being open. Small players aren't losing because they're worse. They're losing because they're excluded, because they can't buy visibility. They can't negotiate leverage. They can't survive long enough to wait out the pressure. And when the story becomes survival of the biggest, we stop calling it competition and start calling it inevitability. This isn't just aggressive competition. This is a direct challenge to the idea of open markets. Because open markets only work when access is shared, when information is visible, when no single player can decide who gets a chance. Once that balance breaks, the market starts serving power instead of participants. The most dangerous part is what comes next. Once control is established, the advantage becomes permanent. It compounds, it reinforces itself, and every cycle makes it harder for anyone outside the system to break in. At that point, the market doesn't correct itself. It locks itself. So this is the fight of the future. Big money using control to secure advantage versus open access that keeps markets fair and competitive. This isn't theoretical. It's already happening. And the outcome will decide whether the next generation competes in open systems or asks permission to participate. This is where everything comes together. There's an unavoidable tension between open access and competitive advantage. Open systems create fairness, efficiency, and trust for the entire market. But private advantage comes from differentiation, control, and exclusivity. The problem isn't that firms want an edge. The problem is when gaining that edge starts to degrade the shared utility everyone depends on. Because once the open marketplace fractures far enough, it stops serving as a common source of truth, and the entire ecosystem pays the price. This has been an extremely important confidential remarks.